Okay, so today we have got a 6 Plus Touch IC to work on. I'll have the schematics and ZXW pulled up while I'm doing this. Let's see, of course, just to spite me now that the camera's rolling, it's going to sit here and work. There we go. So we got touch out. I actually saw the gray bars earlier while it was charging and dead. So we know it's classic Touch IC repair. And for the most part, I already have it disassembled. I've got all the screws out of it just to save a little bit of time on the recording. Power that off since it'll let me. Set the screen aside here. Alright, so this is a really common repair. I'm sure most of you already know why this is a repair that's done. Of course, touch disease, particularly on the 6 Plus, though it does also affect the 6. In our case, we have a 6 Plus here. So there's our board out of the housing. And you can't really see a lot from that view, but I will try and get some still shots and some better angles and things. I will have some schematics and board views to show you, but let's see if it'll focus at all. There you go. So let me grab some tweezers to show you here. What we're looking at are the chips that control touch on the iPhone 6 Plus and the 6 are the top chip here, Meson, and the lower chip here, Cumulus. More often than not, Meson is the issue. This is a classic gray bars situation, so that will be the chip that we are replacing. If it's an issue, we will replace the set, but more frequently it's going to be this chip right here. So, let me grab some flux here. And I don't have a very thin needle on this, so I'm actually going to use my tweezers to apply it. Hoping I can put this over here and you guys can still get some kind of view. Let's see, what is it going to take? Probably not. Okay, well, we'll get this flux on. So what I'm doing right now is I've just got flux on the end of a pair of tweezers, and I'm going around all of the edges of this chip so that when I heat it and the flux melts, it will flow underneath the chip and hit all the balls we're trying to disconnect. There we go. So for a bit of reference for you, if you can see it at all, yeah, you can kind of see it. There's the gooey goodness. Okay. And I really wish there was a good way to do that. Okay. So not everybody does this. Everybody's kind of got their own ways of doing it. I'm sure some people will tell me I shouldn't be doing some of the things I'm doing, but in my experience it works, so it's not wrong. And what I will do is fasten the board. I'll pull this over here so you can see. I will fasten the board to, this is a granite tile that I just used to protect my desk from the hot air station. And I will scotch tape, or really whatever tape, scotch tape's what I have here, this board to this tile so that it's not moving around while we're trying to take off this chip. And so we got our hot air station. Get that going here. Good pair of tweezers. Wait for that to get up to temperature. I turn the airflow down a little bit. This isn't actually my hot air station. Mine is on the Fritz. So this one I've been turning the airflow down to about a little over half. It's all kind of irrelevant on a hot air station. This one is actually digital. It's at 450, which of course will be Celsius. Alright, let's get this chip off of here. So what you want to do is keep a fair distance from the board at first while you're flowing this to let the board heat evenly and to let the flux melt. And you'll notice if you've got cruddy flux, it'll bubble really poorly and it'll lift these chips up. I'm using Amtech flux here, so I'm not concerned about that. And once you've got the flux melted and the board heated, you get a little closer. I like to keep the hot air station going in concentric circles around the chip and lift it right off. If you're lucky and you're good enough, you can lift these things off so that all the balls stay on the chip. It's very rare that I am that lucky, and I was not this time. So there's our Mason chip. Now, I don't know if you could honestly reball this and put it back. I don't. I will actually be replacing this chip because I don't want to deal with a warranty down the road. They're not good for business. So we'll stick that in our little bin. I'll let you get a look. Though I guess I can stop doing this because I will actually have screenshots. Though that actually looks like it works pretty well. So you can see all the solder balls where that chip was. We're going to clean that up with some wick and a soldering iron, and then we're going to reball a new chip for it. So I've got a Hacko soldering iron sitting here. Turn that on right now. Get a little more flux on the board. And what's going on here is you want these balls to be as flat as possible. I say balls, pads rather. You want the balls off of the pads. And the pads as flat as possible to accept the new chip because it needs to sit perfectly even for all of those to connect. Let my iron heat up here. And we're waiting, and we're waiting. Okay, that should do it. Get it unwrapped here. And I'm going to be using this is a braided copper wick. This is just good for picking up solder through capillary action. I don't know what brand this is. This is a really fine braid. I really like it. I would like to find the brand out so I can get more of this, but I don't have the packaging, so that's unlikely. Okay, and that went pretty well. And now, for this reason, a lot of people will tell you not to use wick when doing this, which is, I don't know, I'm kind of back and forth. I kind of tend to agree with that, at least on a conceptual level, though I do also tend to use it. And I have an example here of why they will tell you not to. Let me clean these pads up with some alcohol. Go. Okay, I think you'll be able to see this. What I've got, well, maybe you won't. Yeah, you may not be able to see it, but there is actually a pad gone where this chip was now, which is generally not good, though that came up pretty easily. My bet is that it is a pad that is not connected. So we're going to go over to ZXW here. And ZXW is a tool that would allow you to see basically what connects to what all over the board. We're going to go down to the Mason chip, which is U2402. Let's see what ball are we missing here. One thing I don't like about this software thus far, I'm missing two pads, is that you cannot reorient the board. You can't change the orientation of the board in the view, so I tend to just work on the board in the orientation that matches ZXW. Though sometimes that's not very easy to do. I'm left-handed, by the way, so there's that. Okay, so I've got the second row, third from the last down, or column. Second column, third from the last row is going to be this guy, NC. NC means not connected. They have a perfectly gridded amount of pads on the board, but not all of them are always used. This one doesn't actually go anywhere, so that is why it came off so easily. And now we're going to go fifth column, sixth from the bottom. Fifth column, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 from the bottom. Also not connected. So we're good to go on that. Now I want to go ahead and take this board off of our tile. And before I do anything else, I'm actually going to inspect this under the microscope one more time. What I'm doing is actually tilting the board at an angle to verify all of the pads are as flat as I need them to be. There's one sticking up a little bit. Let's see, I think... No, want to hit that one again. And so we'll wait on the soldering iron to heat back up. That kind of sucks. It's one single pad sitting just a little higher than I'm willing to let it. So find our flux here. Just a tiny, that's way too much. I use way too much flux, but I don't care because it works. Get that back under the microscope. Didn't even put that flux in the right spot, so I'm gonna kind of smear it over. And I made it a whole lot worse instead of better. So what I'm going to do is actually just put some fresh flux down and wick the whole thing again. And you can see as the wick gets used, it soaks that solder up and becomes solid instead of a braid. At which point I just clip the end off and keep rolling with it. Stick some tape down to keep that guy still. Yeah, I think that'll do it. Alright, clean my soldering tip. Always put a little bit of solder on the end of your tip if you don't already know this. When you turn it off, because it will oxidize, and you're better off if it oxidizes a ball of solder than the tip itself, unless you just love replacing tips frequently. Okay, so we got that done. Grab a Q-tip and clean that old flux off of there. We'll put some more on, but not until the chip is ready. I want fresh, not hard, not gross flux. So those are flat enough. I think you'll be able to see now. See those two little black spots? One in the upper left corner and one just diagonal of it. Those were pads, but are no longer. There you go. Very good view there. So those two pads are gone, but they're both not connected, so we're not going to worry about that. They will have matching balls on the bottom of the chip, but also there won't be anything inside of the chip that connects there. Maybe ground. I don't know. I doubt it. So we will be pulling our Mason chip off of a donor board today, which means I need to dig out a donor board today. And see if I can find one that still has it. Looks like that'll work. So there's our donor board. I'm not going to do up close shots. You can see a lot of this is already missing. This one has been a trooper. We'll go ahead and pull this chip off of here quickly. Tape, keep it still. We're not very still. There we go. Doesn't take much. I'm not trying to get this one working, just trying to rip something off of it. Wait on flow here. And that looked like a pretty good pull. We'll examine it here.
So,
one ball came off, so we will go ahead and reball it.
6-inch deal of the day. It's easy to get a photo.
But it's going pretty well here. We'll show you up close, if it'll let me. Yeah, there you go. So it was a near perfect pull off, just not quite.
It's not bad. Yeah.
Now before we can put this back on, we're actually going to have to reball it. Toss my donor board back in the bin here. Find my stencil. A little unorganized because we are just moved into a new office here, so I'm still kind of figuring out where my own stuff goes. Okay, so there are a lot of different methods that I've seen on these reballs. Very first thing, regardless, that you'll have to do, you can't even see that chip on that tile. It's there though. Is clean this one off so that it's reasonably flat. I don't think it's as important on the chip side to change my tip there, to have it perfectly flat as it is on the board side, simply because I'm going to stick it in a stencil and put balls on it anyway. So I'm in too big a hurry, so I'm going to use pliers to take this tip off of here. And what I'm switching to, that was just a flat-edged, I actually don't know these names very well. I guess that would have been a chisel. It wasn't a conical tip, just like a flat brush that was narrow enough to get the pads where the chip was. This one I use because it's much larger, much flatter surface, and much easier to handle. There you go. Big old fat actual chisel tip. And I'll use that to clean the balls off of the chip before we reball it and put it onto the board. And there's our stencil for this particular phone. Very thin sheet of steel that's just got holes punched out, like a cheese grater. And we'll jam some solder paste in there and reflow them. This back over under the microscope. And I need to probably get some still shots of this stuff. That way I can throw some stuff up and let you guys actually see what's happening under the microscope. I do have a microscope camera to use, but because I want the repair to be successful, I don't want to use one eyeball through the microscope, and I do not have a trinocular input on this microscope. So, we'll do what we can to make it work. And so to clean the chip off, I'll get a pretty good sized, well, if I can get my finger up in there, a pretty good size dab of flux on it. And I'll grip it pretty tightly with what I found is just the flattest pair of tweezers you have, to give yourself sort of a rail to sit that chip in. Otherwise, that soldering iron is going to move it all over your table. I've tried taping the chip down, doing a couple of other things, and I just find that it's easier just to hold it there. More flux on it here. And some people will wick these chips as well. I just don't find it necessary. Though it does seem a lot less dangerous to wick the chip than it does the board, simply because the pads are on the bottom of the chip are coming directly out of it and are much more resilient than the pads that are glued to the top of the PCB. Clean that off with a bit of alcohol. Okay, so I'm going to stop showing this under the camera, and I'm actually just going to start taking stills under the microscope so that you guys get a better view of this. Okay. So now on to the reballing. And like I said, there are a lot of different ways people do this. I'll show you my method. They don't make, and I have looked, they don't make chip vices small enough for a lot of these chips. I want to say the smallest I found was like a 90 or 80 millimeter vise, and some of these chips are like under 10 millimeters. So yeah, that's pretty impractical. Try to find the right stencil here. It's got a bunch of crud in it, so I'm going to clean it out real quick. There we go. So you can see the holes, you can see clean through it. Alright, so basically what I want to do is adhere this chip to the back of that stencil so that the pads poke through the holes without moving. The best way I have found to do it is cut off a little piece of Kapton, just a little strip of Kapton tape. I will lick my finger, wipe it across this tile, and that surface tension is enough to keep that tape flat down on the tile so that I can set the chip down on top of it. So yeah, that does likely mean that if I have done a board level repair for you, especially Touch IC, there's probably a bit of me in your phone. Yeah, that's the thing. Okay. So now, excuse me, I will need the microscope for it. Go ahead and snap another picture just because you never know. There we go. And I do see some little solder strings from that picture. So let me clean this real quick. I don't want any shorts to form. That should do. Alright, find the right stencil here. Okay, so now what I've got is Kapton tape with a chip stuck to it, sitting on the tile, sticky side up. And I'm going to line up this stencil and then press the stencil down onto the tape, and that will keep the stencil there. And then what I'll do is flip it over and just give it a good bit of pressure with my finger, make sure the tape's down flat. I also like it on the end because now I have a real easy way to pull that chip off when I'm done. So that's fairly well lined up. You can't, at least I haven't really been able to do much adjustment after the fact, so you kind of got to nail it on the first go. Or you got to take it off and start the whole thing over. So there's a shot of it in the stencil. And now what I do is grab solder paste. And what this is, it's just solder balls, really microscopic and unimaginably small solder balls in a solution of flux to keep it liquid. So I'll get just a dab. You can do this with a razor blade, you can do it with a glove, you can do it with your finger. I kind of switch off. It really just depends on the day. And we'll just rub that into the stencil where our chip is at. And we'll wipe the top of it. Probably needs a little bit more on there. Now, I don't really have a recommendation on solder paste, but I would say make sure to get some quality stuff. We did start out with some from a local store here that was very, very difficult to use and really couldn't be in a lot of cases. What we have now is, I mean, it's not branded. It comes from a local shop here that wholesales electronics parts. And it's worked well. Nothing special. Get that in focus. Okay, so we'll get another picture here, let you guys get a look. There we go. And so I've seen some people put a little bit of flux on top of this. In my experience, doing that tends to cause all of the solder balls to float out of the stencil before I get them flowed, so I don't mess with that. Get my hot air gun on, and like I said, temperature and airflow don't really matter. You control both of those with your hand, with your distance to the object. This one happens to be digital, so I do just happen to know that it's set at 450. The airflow goes to 8. I've got it at like 6.5, but again, that's pretty much irrelevant to anybody in the world. And we'll just come down, and some people go slow. I actually tend to go pretty quick on these reflows to not give the balls time to flow down and run into each other, which for the most part is not a problem, except for myself when I try to do PMIC's power management chips for the 6 series of iPhones. I've had a very difficult time reflowing those, or reballing those.
Anybody knows a good method?
Yeah, in fact, yeah, if anybody does have a good method and is interested in sharing it, or am I just like really bad at that particular thing? I don't know. Always trying to change equipment and change parts and things to improve, but that's one I just have not been able to figure out. Okay, so the chip pulled right off the stencil, no problem. Sometimes, and particularly with power management chips, the solder balls will actually squeeze out of the front of the stencil just enough so that it actually sticks, jams itself to the stencil, and you can't clean it off or pull it off cleanly. Most of these, though, if you do them properly, they don't have any pressure. You can just pull them right off. So what I'll do is lay that back down, sticky side up, so that I see the solder balls under the microscope. Hit it with a hot air station again, just to reflow those balls in place, make sure they're all on their pads and not oxidized. Doesn't take much. And then I will grab a trusty Q-tip and make sure that it is clean enough to connect to our pads on the board. Usually that doesn't take much either. If it does, you probably did something wrong. Make sure you don't have any loose Q-tip hairs on these things. That can be kind of tricky to avoid. I've gotten pretty good at it at this point, but from what I've seen and what I have Q-tip brand Q-tips right now just because that's what was handy. But what I find is the cheaper the Q-tip, the crappier the Q-tip, the better off you are with this work, because they tend to be less fibrous because they're lower quality. Makeup Q-tips are about the best because they're kind of spongy, but they're not always available, so you use what you got. Go. And I may do some videos showing how to do things like this, but what I try to do with the Q-tip is what I do is I dip it in alcohol, and as I'm trying to clean the chip, I try to twirl the Q-tip itself so that if it does drop any fibers, it's more likely to pick them up on its way off of the board, which it does tend to do. It's not 100%, but it's certainly a lot better than not doing that. Alright, so now we got chip and board ready to go. Snap one more picture here before we actually set it down. Okay. So I'll do now always, and I didn't say this at the beginning of the video, and I'm terrible about it, so that checks out, but always check your orientation on these chips. If you put a chip on upside down, not only will that chip not work, you're likely to do a lot more damage to that phone. So always make sure that's proper. In this particular case, I do enough of these that I know the Meson chip goes on with the text facing upside down. So I'm not worried about it, but I also didn't check it like I should. So what we'll do is get a little flux. It doesn't take a whole lot. Down on the board where the pads are, gotta make sure that's covering everything. So in case you're hearing the dings, that is our POS system. We use Repair Shopper here at PartSwap. And we use their customer portal, which is an awesome feature. If you have Repair Shopper, I definitely recommend it.
Can you make payments to the customer portal?
You can. You can make payments, which is what, what just happened. That's actually the first time anybody's done that. But yeah, the great thing about Repair Shopper is that you can, not that I'm selling it, because it does have problems like all of them.
Doing
But
Repair Shopper integrations.
yeah, right. But I do recommend it. It is probably the best service out there. The customer portal is nice. You can update your customers via that portal, and they have one location to go and see anything that's going on, all their devices, make payments, all of that good stuff. They can even open, I say open, they're open a request, a ticket request from the portal if it's a regular customer and you do business that way. Okay, so we'll get one more shot here. And so you can see what I've got. It's flux over all of those pads. I do have the chip sitting just below it, just so it's ready to go. Go ahead and get my hot air station on. Definitely, probably don't need to secure this board, but it's better safe than sorry. Ooh, got some flux. It's not going to let me stick my tape down. That is why I do Q-tip this tile frequently after any step that requires flux, because that tape does not want to touch it with that flux on there. Hopefully that'll yeah, no, I'm gonna have to clean it and retape that. Oh, almost lost my chip there. Get that good and clean. Don't have to use a Q-tip, it's just there, so I'm using it. But I just rub it down with some alcohol. Grab a couple of new strips of tape. That should keep us stationary. Okay, so what I'll do is line this up. Make sure it's facing the right way, which it is not. Now, if you are doing a Meson, and I don't even like saying things like this because I do know there are multiple manufacturers and different manufacturing timelines for some of these parts, but on this particular one, most of these chips, they will put a dot on the corner where pin A1 or where ball A1 goes. And in this particular case, you want that marking to be in the upper right-hand corner if you have the board upright. But again, don't quote me on that. Different manufacturing specs, different board revisions and things, and not a lot of that going on the 6 Plus, but it does. And if you're trying to carry this information from phone to phone, it's good to know what does and what does not. So we've got it laid down here, and I try as best I can to line it up where it will be when it is complete. Right? You don't want it too high or too low or too left or too right, because then you can short balls together or miss a row completely. There are a lot of things that can go wrong there. So you want it lined up as well as you can. turn my air down a little more, closer to 5, because I don't want this chip jumping around. Tell you what, I'm sitting here, we'll get one more shot. I know taking the time to take these pictures is probably annoying you, but you wouldn't get to see this if I didn't. So, ooh, well, that's one for the trash. There we go. So, same as taking it off, we'll start at a fair distance, wait for all the flux to get melted, concentric circles around the chip. You'll start to see, if you see the flux bubbling very much, you're probably too close or too hot. You want a little bit of bubbling, but not enough to jostle the chip around. And what you'll notice, and I can't show this to you guys on this video simply because we don't have a way to show it, but you'll see the chip slip when it reaches the proper temperature. It'll slip, there it goes, right onto its balls, or its balls right onto its pads. We'll stay on it for about 10 more seconds, make sure we get everything melted. It will flow at the edges faster than the center, generally. And that should do.
Okay, what was your name? Yeah, just
Snap another pic.
success, right?
Yeah.
Backlight, yeah, it's good to go.
Awesome. Yeah. When's a good time for you? Anytime? Are you at the address where we picked it up from? Okay. I'd say most of the time we just do drop-offs at the same location, so just give us a call when whenever you get there. We'll dispatch Levi and drop that back off to you.
Okay, so it's looking like we got that lined up well.
Okay. All right. I'll let him know. Thank you.
So we'll pull our tape, let that cool a little bit. You don't want to jostle that chip around or let it cool too quickly. You get a cold solder joints that way.
An hour?
Now-ish.
Oh, now-ish.
Ish.
Yeah, it looks to be good
He's
and
there.
lined up.
He says he's a minute away.
Oh,
So
okay.
I'd say.
Yeah, I'll cut out then.
Alright, now before we actually put this thing back together and test it, always check VCC main. VCC main is the primary power rail for any of these phones. If that thing is short, most likely your phone won't come on at all, which does happen. So be aware of that. It's also a real pain to track down if that does happen. But what we'll do is, see if I can, no, you don't need it, it's going to beep, but get the multimeter in continuity mode. I'm actually using a set of leads with sewing needles soldered to the ends of them. I have some fine point leads, but these are just easier to get down into the edges of these chips. So there's a particular capacitor on the back of this board, this guy right up here, on a 6 and 6 Plus is the fastest way to that I know of to check VCC main. It's not under a shield, you don't have to desolder anything, you just got to get the board out and flip it over. So we'll go to ground. This will be the negative side, which should be ground. If I can touch it right, there we go, and we'll go positive, which is nothing. So at least that rail, the rail that I'm worried about, is not shorted. So at that point, we'll go ahead and test this thing. I don't have the loose parts with me, so I'm actually just going to pop it back into the housing. Now if you're doing this, and I will as I assemble it, don't forget to put that little sheet, this little guy, back on the back of this. It seems unimportant, it's just a crappy little sticker. That is actually, I believe, an EFI shield for the NFC antenna. So, I mean, I guess if you don't use NFC and it's your phone, who cares? But if it's for a customer, do it right. And I'm not going to plug all of the bits in right now. I just want to see if the touch is going to work properly. So we'll slide that in there. Get all our flexes out of the way. Alright. So I'll plug in power button, volume button, flex, charge port, of course screen. Well, I'll plug in the camera just so the flex isn't in my way. So we'll plug in our digitizer, our LCD, and home button. I'm not really worried about much else, just to see if touch works. Got the battery connected. I always check, just feel it, make sure it's not heating up. If something, well, again, if it's shorted, it's either going to be something like VCC main or 1V8 always that will heat up without the phone powered on. Of course, if it's 1V8 always, I don't actually know, but I doubt you would notice that. There's probably not enough current there to heat anything up. We got it together. It's still coming on, so that's a good start. And we'll let this boot up and see what we get.
It's always good.
Right.
Pretty excited to get that new memory card.
And it's slow booting. But there we go. And let's check. Looks like we have touchback. Now, of course, this particular one wasn't absolutely no touch. It was in and out. It had gray bars the whole nine. So I will do a full testing suite on this thing, but I'm pretty confident in that. So that's how you do it. Touch IC on a 6 Plus. It's not always that easy. It's not always that hard, so it varies. But that was replacing the Meson chip,
You guys.
and that should do it. Hope you learned something, and check with us on the next one.
Hey guys, Gabriel with PartSwap. Thanks so much for checking out the video. If you liked it, like it. If you didn't, dislike it. Feel free to head on over to our website, PartSwap.Shop, if you're in need of any of the services advertised or what was shown today. That was the Touch IC replacement. That was Kyle in the video. He did a great job. We'll have more repair videos of the like coming soon, as well as other podcasts. Thanks so much.